Chapter 19. The captain turned swiftly and ran back to his schooner. Small clusters of people gathered here and there along the quiet shore. But Julilly felt no need to be greeted by anyone. She began to hum softly as the words rang in her head. "Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home." Julilly walked toward Liza and shook her gently on the shoulder. "You can't just sit here prayin' for the rest of your life, Liza." Julilly laughed with a full, strong voice. "We've a ways to go yet, and there's a man right up there waitin' to take us there." Liza seemed dazed, but she stood without help from Julilly, and the two of them walked silently round the shoreline toward the colored man, whose wagon was hitched to an aged brown horse. As they neared him, he seemed to recognize them as his passengers and stood waving them toward him. Liza drew back. "We'd best hide in those bushes, Julilly, until it's dark." "What's he mean, lettin' everyone see him wavin' at us?" "Liza," Julilly shook her friend again. "We are in Canada, and we are free, and free means not havin' to hide no more." Liza stopped in shocked amazement as though this new idea struck her like a bolt of lightning. "You is right, Julilly," Liza said, and her back seemed to straighten a little with almost no expression of pain on her face. "We can walk right up to that cart and climb on board and lift up our heads, just like the white people always do." The kindly brown-skinned driver climbed down and held out both his hands. He was tall and strong, and his hair bushed out from his head like a gray and black speckled frame. "I'm Ezra Wilson," he said, smiling as though the sun had lighted his face with a spark. "Massa Ross sent word you were comin', and Lester said I was to bring you right to him in St. Catherine's." He reached for Julilly's hand and then Liza's and held them tight. The girls were speechless until Liza's sullen eyes suddenly sparkled. "I was sort of expectin' that Queen Victoria herself might be marchin' up and down the shore when we arrived," she said, "but I think, Ezra Wilson, that you look just as good." Ezra Wilson chuckled, but continued to hold their hands. "I know how you feel," he nodded quietly. "I came here last year, just like you, at the time of the harvest. We'd best not talk now." The tall, strong man turned from them and began to busy himself with the fresh straw and blankets in the back of the cart. "It's a 2-day trip to St. Catherine's. We'll have plenty of time to say a good many things by then." The girls climbed into the cart and settled themselves on the straw. It was too warm for the blankets now. The morning sun had a soothing warmth. There was a burnished glow about it, like the ripened skin of a red apple. Ezra Wilson sat above them and flicked the reins for the horse to go. The cart began to jog up a steep road, lined on either side by tall, green pines. The 2 days of travel along the country roads of Upper Canada with kindly Ezra Wilson were a time of peace and quiet joy for Julilly and Liza. At first, they covered themselves with the blankets when other people came their way. But no one stopped them, and no one shouted, and when they came to the small towns and were hungry, they walked into the stores and bought food with the money Massa Ross had given them. At night, when the sun disappeared, they felt the hard cold of this new North Country. Then the blankets warmed them, and they were never afraid. On the second morning, the leaves on the trees beside their jogging cart were yellow gold. Ezra Wilson stopped and spread a blanket beneath them, and they ate their lunch. "It's like heaven here," Liza murmured softly. Ezra Wilson stood up abruptly. "No, it isn't heaven," he said curtly, "and I've got to tell you how it is." He looked at the girls a long time and then continued. "We colored folks in St. Catherine's work hard, very hard. But we've got food to eat, and most of us have a warm, dry place to live." Julilly looked at him with apprehension. What else did he have to tell them to let them know that Canada wasn't just a place with yellow gold leaves? Ezra continued to stand. His face was stern, but he didn't raise his voice. "We've found jobs," he said, "but none of us can read, and all the white folks can." "Read?" Julilly asked, never having thought in all her life that she might ever learn to read. "It seems, Liza and Julilly, that the white folks don't want us in their schools." Ezra's face grew sad. "There's a St. Paul's Ward School in St. Catherine's for the colored and a St. Paul's Ward School for the whites, and the white school's got more books and more paper and more desks and a good strong building. But can we go to school and learn to read?" Julilly's eyes grew round with wonder. Would they let somebody like me come? Liza lifted herself painfully to look up into the face of tall Ezra Wilson. I'm learnin'. Ezra smiled down at her and rubbed his gray-flecked hair. Now I guess I'll just end all this warning talk by saying that I made up my mind that salt and potatoes in Canada are better than pound cake and chickens in a state of worry and suspense in the United States. Now let's eat lunch. While he talked, Julilly remembered what Massa Ross had told them a long time ago in Mississippi, that escaping into Canada would be hard and that living in Canada would be hard, too. But it didn't seem to hurt to remember this. She and Liza could work, and salt and potatoes weren't bad for eating when no slave owner was around to threaten or whip. One night Ezra Wilson talked about St. Catharines, how Lester worked there as a porter in the Welland House Hotel where a special pipe brought magic mineral water to all the guests. He told how former slaves helped to build the hotel and how many of them worked there now. It's a grand place. Ezra spread his long arms wide and high. A big porch runs along the front of it, and all the fine people sit there rockin' away in their chairs. Julilly and Liza were excited and yet worried about arriving in the town. They talked continually to one another in the jogging wagon. How would it be to live in a town and not be a slave? How would Lester look? If only Adam had lived to welcome them too. Julilly yearned to ask Ezra Wilson if he had ever seen or heard of a handsome black woman called Mammy Sally. But she didn't dare. As long as no one had heard of her, there was always hope that she would come to Canada. But if they did know, and something bad had happened to her, Julilly wanted to put off the knowing of it as long as she could. On the morning of the third day, Ezra told them that the town they were coming to was St. Catharines. At first it looked like the other villages they had traveled through. There were large and small houses, mostly built of brick. Trees and shrubs and flowers grew everywhere. But on the streets of St. Catharines were many black folks just like them. When they came to the part of the town where the shops were, they saw many more. They aren't dressed fancy, Liza said to Julilly, but they aren't wearing rags. At the end of the street, they saw a large 2-story building with a wide porch running across the front of it, the Welland House Hotel. Ezra pulled in the reins to slow the horse. In front of the hotel stood a light-skinned colored man with freckles. He wore a tight suit that buttoned up the front with shining gold buttons. It's Lester, Julilly shouted. She jumped from the wagon and ran toward him. Lester grabbed both her hands in his and looked at her fondly. Julilly searched his face. Lester was well and content, but the anger was still in his eyes and the pride was still in his high-held head. Julilly was glad. The beatings and chains hadn't crushed him down like a snake. Together they saw Liza trying to crawl over the back of the wagon. Lester ran toward her and picked her up in his arms. The three of them stood together for a moment in a tight, happy circle. Tall, kind Ezra Wilson joined them. Then Lester placed Liza gently on the dirt road beneath them. As he did so, he glanced toward a door at the far end of the hotel. You'll want to see her right away in the kitchen, Julilly, Lester said. Her? Kitchen? Julilly was puzzled. Was it someone wanting to give her a job in the kitchen? It's a surprise I planned for you, Julilly, Lester said. I made Ezra promise not to tell. Angry, hostile Lester became surprisingly sheepish. A woman opened the far back door. Julilly stared. She was tall and dark-skinned with a white kerchief about her head. But her hair was gray. Her face was wrinkled. She was old. Then the woman came toward them limping, but with long, full strides. Mammy Sally, Julilly cried and ran into her mother's outstretched arms. Child, child, Mammy Sally sang the words over and over again. Finally, she held Julilly at arm's length. Her eyes were radiant. June Lily, you have grown. She looked again with grave concern. You have become a woman. Julilly didn't hear. Being with Mammy Sally again was like shifting a 100-pound sack of cotton from her back and just taking on a 2-pound load instead. But it also filled her heart with such a joy she wanted to shout and sing. Instead, Julilly put a strong arm around her mother to support her. How did you know, Mammy? How did you know to come out that door and meet me? She asked. Land, child, didn't Massa Ross tell you I was here, or did Lester keep it a secret from him too? Mammy Sally laughed and tears streamed down her cheeks. Julilly remembered Liza. She led her mother to the hunched, thin girl who stood quietly on the road. Liza came with me, Julilly said simply to Mammy Sally. We are like sisters. Mammy Sally touched Liza gently on the head. You gonna live with us, Liza? I'm buying us a little house. She stood proud and tall before all of them. We'll walk there now. They all started walking down the wide dirt road, Liza, Julilly, and Mammy Sally in the lead with Lester and Ezra behind them. We are free and we are together, Mammy Sally almost sang the words. Then she paused and looked long and joyfully at the strangely dressed girls beside her. She started walking again and said, Freedom isn't easy. We black folks can't read and we can't write, and the white people in St. Catherine's don't want us in their schools. We are poor, but we are buildin' us a church and buildin' us a school. We are poor, but we get paid for the jobs we do. We are poor, but some of us are buildin' houses on the land we own. We are poor, but none of us is slaves. Mammy Sally's words became a song. There was a rhythm and a rising cadence to each new line. They all began marching toward a grove of tall, green pines. Julilly glanced at her mother's face. It had deep wrinkles. The hair that shone beneath her kerchief was powdery white with specks of gray. There were scars on Mammy's neck. She'd been lashed with a whip. She limped when she walked. But her head was high and her voice rang with courage and deep joy. Julilly put a strong arm around her mother to support her. She pulled Liza along with her other hand. Mammy Sally needed her. Liza and Lester needed her. She was growing up. There was a lot for her to do in this great new land of freedom.